In the global chessboard of trade, even the finest spirits aren't safe. Recently, China uncorked a bold move, extending its anti-dumping investigation on EU brandy imports, a decision that adds a hefty 40% security deposit on these luxury drinks. The prime targets? Renowned French icons like Hennessy and Remy Martin. For French exporters, it's not just a tariff hike, it's a sour note threatening a market valued at $1.7 billion annually. France's trade ministry fired back, branding China's actions incomprehensible and a violation of free trade principles. But, beneath the surface, this isn't merely a dispute over premium liquor. It's a calculated response to Europe's recent tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles. French President Emmanuel Macron didn't mince words, calling the investigation pure retaliation. China's measures send a clear message. Trade wars don't discriminate. What started as European efforts to shield their auto industry has spiraled into a broader economic conflict, with luxury brandies caught in the crossfire. But why would China, a country with its own burgeoning domestic spirits industry, aim directly at such a niche market? The answer lies in symbolism. French cognac represents not just luxury but Europe's soft power in global markets. Targeting it strikes at a cultural cornerstone while forcing European leaders to reconsider the cost of their defensive tariffs. This bold move by Beijing reveals a growing willingness to leverage economic tools with strategic precision, signaling that no trade weapon is off the table. As tensions rise, the battle over brandy is just a sip of the broader challenges to come. What does this mean for the future of EU-China relations, and how might it reshape global trade dynamics? Stay tuned as the stakes grow higher and the retaliation sharper. To understand why French brandy has become collateral damage in this escalating trade war, we must first explore the root of the conflict: electric vehicles. In recent years, China has electrified the global auto industry, becoming not just a player but the dominant force. By 2023, Chinese automakers had sold over 13.6 million electric vehicles, securing their position as global market leaders. Brands like BYD, NIO, and XPeng have turned China into an EV superpower, with BYD even overtaking Tesla as the world's top seller. What makes Chinese electric vehicles so competitive? It's their unmatched ability to scale production. China's vast domestic market has fueled economies of scale, enabling manufacturers to produce electric vehicles up to 20% cheaper than their European counterparts. But it's not just about cost. China also leads in battery technology, the lifeblood of electric vehicles. With control over 75% of the world's lithium-ion battery production and groundbreaking innovations in areas like sodium-ion and solid-state batteries, China has created a near-unbreakable grip on the EV supply chain. This dominance has put Europe in a difficult position. European automakers like Volkswagen, Renault, and Stellantis face mounting pressure to catch up, both in terms of cost efficiency and technological innovation. Worse, Europe remains heavily dependent on Chinese-made batteries, underscoring the strategic vulnerability of its domestic electric vehicle ambitions. Faced with these challenges, the European Commission took action, alleging that Chinese EV manufacturers were flooding the market with subsidized vehicles sold at artificially low prices. The EU imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese EV imports. Tariffs ranging from 17% to as high as 38% were levied, aiming to shield Europe's auto industry during its costly transition to electrification. However, this bold move didn't come without risks. The EU's decision angered Beijing, which framed these tariffs as protectionist and discriminatory. China responded with surgical precision, turning its trade crosshairs toward European exports, particularly French cognac, a calculated shot at one of Europe's most lucrative luxury industries. China wasted no time in responding. Citing threats to its domestic brandy industry, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce imposed anti-dumping duties on European brandy imports, targeting the lifeline of French luxury exports. Prominent French producers like Hennessy and Remy Martin found themselves at the epicenter of Beijing's countermeasures. With security deposits of nearly 40% now required up front, the cost of importing French brandy into China skyrocketed overnight. This move was no random act. China's retaliation was strategic and symbolic. It struck at the heart of Europe's identity, its luxury goods industry. French President Emmanuel Macron denounced the tariffs as pure retaliation, while France's trade ministry accused China of violating free trade principles. But Beijing remained unmoved, framing the duties as necessary to protect its domestic market from alleged European dumping practices. As the lines in this trade conflict deepen, One thing is clear. This isn't just about cars or brandy. It's about the broader economic forces driving global power shifts, where every trade policy becomes both a shield and a weapon. And as the EU and China square off, the fallout will ripple far beyond Europe's borders. The EU's tariffs on Chinese EV imports were not just an economic decision, they were a declaration of resistance. For European leaders, it was a necessary step to protect their homegrown industries from being overrun by subsidized competition. But in the high-stakes game of global trade, every action invites a reaction. For France, the stakes are enormous. In 2023, French brandy exports to China were valued at $1.7 billion, accounting for 99% of China's brandy imports. Losing this market isn't just about profit margins, it's about prestige and the delicate balance of trade that defines Franco-Chinese relations. Major players like LVMH, which owns Hennessy, and Pernod Ricard, have already felt the shockwaves, with stock prices dipping in the wake of China's announcement. But China's retaliation isn't merely an economic maneuver, it's a statement of intent. By targeting high-profile industries like French brandy, Beijing signals that it won't back down in the face of Western protectionism. Instead, it's doubling down, using its leverage in other sectors to even the score. This tit-for-tat escalation has created a precarious situation. The EU, emboldened by its resolve to protect domestic industries, now faces a daunting challenge: how to stand firm against Beijing's counterpunch without triggering a full-blown trade war. Meanwhile, China's swift and calculated retaliation underscores its ability to weaponize trade in response to perceived slights. As this economic chess game unfolds, one question looms large: who will blink first? The answer will shape not just the future of EU-China relations, but also the global trade landscape. Europe's decision to impose tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles wasn't made lightly. It was a strategic move to address an increasingly unbalanced playing field. For years, China has leveraged state subsidies and industrial scale to dominate the EV market, leaving European manufacturers scrambling to compete. But with these new tariffs, Europe declared it wouldn't allow its industries to be outpaced without a fight. The numbers tell the story. Chinese automakers sold 13.6 million EVs globally in 2023 alone, making them leaders in both production and affordability. Companies like BYD and NIO have not only captured the domestic Chinese market, but also gained traction worldwide, offering EVs at costs up to 20% lower than their European counterparts. This price gap, fueled by government support in the form of grants, tax rebates, and low-interest loans, has forced European automakers into a corner. The European Union's investigation into Chinese EV imports revealed the depth of these subsidies. From discounted land for factories to access to critical raw materials like lithium and cobalt, the Chinese government has built an ecosystem that allows its manufacturers to thrive. The EU's response was decisive. Tariffs ranging from 17% to 38% were imposed, in addition to the standard 10% import duty on foreign vehicles. For European automakers like Volkswagen, Renault, and Stellantis, this was a moment of both relief and reckoning. The tariffs provided breathing room to recalibrate their strategies, but they also highlighted the pressing need for innovation and cost efficiency in Europe's EV sector. Initiatives like the European Battery Alliance and investments in local battery production aim to reduce reliance on Chinese imports and foster a competitive domestic industry. China, however, was quick to respond. Major EV companies began exploring ways to sidestep the tariffs. BYD announced plans to establish manufacturing facilities within the EU, a move that would allow it to bypass import duties while maintaining its competitive edge. Meanwhile, Beijing condemned the tariffs as protectionist, hinting at possible legal action through the World Trade Organization. The EU's actions mark a turning point in its relationship with China. While aimed at protecting domestic industries, they also set the stage for a broader confrontation over trade practices and economic dominance. The EV market, a cornerstone of the global push for sustainability, has become a battleground for influence and control. For Europe, this is more than an economic challenge. It's a test of its ability to adapt to a rapidly shifting global landscape. The transition to EVs is capital-intensive, requiring billions in investment for research, infrastructure, and manufacturing. If Europe succeeds, it could position itself as a leader in the green transition. But if it falters, it risks falling further behind in a market that will define the future of mobility. This confrontation over EVs encapsulates the broader tensions between the EU and China, a struggle for economic sovereignty, technological leadership, and a seat at the table in shaping the industries of tomorrow. As both sides dig in, the stakes continue to rise, with the potential to reshape global trade in profound ways. China's response to the EU's electric vehicle tariffs came swiftly and strategically, targeting an industry few expected: European brandy and specifically the crown jewels of French exports, cognac. In a move that left trade experts and luxury markets reeling, China imposed provisional anti-dumping duties on EU brandy imports, demanding that importers pay nearly 40% in upfront security deposits. The timing and precision of this countermeasure were anything but coincidental. France, as Europe's leading exporter of brandy and cognac, bore the brunt of this retaliation. Iconic producers such as Hennessy, Remy Martin and Martell suddenly faced a steep uphill battle in one of their most lucrative markets. In 2023 alone, French brandy exports to China were valued at approximately $1.7 billion, representing 99% of China's imported brandy. The sudden increase in costs threatened their dominance, as Chinese consumers and importers began exploring alternatives, from domestic producers to other international spirits. China's Ministry of Commerce justified the move by claiming that EU brandy dumping posed a significant risk to its domestic industry. However, French President Emmanuel Macron didn't mince words, calling the measures pure retaliation for Europe's electric vehicle tariffs. The symbolism was striking. As Europe sought to protect its automakers, China targeted the cultural and economic pride of one of its leading nations. The fallout was immediate. Shares of luxury conglomerates such as LVMH, which owns Hennessy, and Pernod Ricard, the parent company of Remy Martin, took a hit as investors grappled with the potential long-term consequences of reduced access to the Chinese market. The broader luxury sector, heavily reliant on China's growing middle and upper classes, began to feel the ripple effects. For Beijing, this move wasn't just about brandy, it was a calculated demonstration of its ability to strike back where it hurts most. By targeting a high-profile, high-value export, China sent a clear message: it has the tools and the will to escalate trade disputes, even in unexpected ways. This strategy not only leveraged its market power, but also underscored the risks of an all-out trade war with one of the world's largest economies. As the brandy dispute unfolded, it highlighted the increasingly intertwined nature of global trade and geopolitics. For Europe, it was a stark reminder that economic measures aimed at protecting one industry could have far-reaching consequences for others. For China, it was an opportunity to showcase its strategic leverage and resilience in the face of Western policies. This battle over brandy is emblematic of a larger dynamic: the growing tit-for-tat trade tensions between the EU and China. It's a reminder that in the interconnected world of global trade, every action invites a reaction, often with unexpected players and industries caught in the crossfire. With both sides holding firm, the stakes continue to climb, raising questions about how far this economic chess game will go, and who will ultimately emerge on top. The escalating trade tensions between the European Union and China are not confined to the immediate players. As the world watches these two economic powerhouses clash, the implications are rippling across global markets, trade networks, and diplomatic relationships, setting off a chain reaction with far-reaching consequences. For Europe, the brandy tariffs are a harsh wake-up call. The EU's strategy to protect its automotive industry has now drawn scrutiny over its broader approach to trade policies. The brandy dispute exposes vulnerabilities in sectors that depend heavily on exports to China, highlighting the fine balance Europe must strike between safeguarding key industries and maintaining access to critical markets. As European policymakers scramble to address the fallout, they face mounting pressure to recalibrate their strategies, ensuring that protective measures don't come at the expense of other vital economic interests. For China, its counterstrike on brandy exemplifies a shift in its trade war playbook. By focusing on high-profile industries like luxury goods, Beijing is flexing its ability to retaliate with precision. This isn't just about economic gains or losses, it's about sending a political message. China is signaling that it will not back down, and it has the economic heft to challenge even the most established global players. The move also underscores Beijing's strategic use of its vast consumer market as a bargaining chip in geopolitical disputes. Beyond Europe and China, the ripple effects are already visible. Other nations are carefully observing this economic tug-of-war, particularly those with significant trade dependencies on either party. Countries like the United States, already embroiled in its own tensions with Beijing, may see an opportunity to capitalize on Europe's strained relations with China, potentially deepening transatlantic ties or influencing global trade alignments. Emerging economies, many of which rely on trade with both the EU and China, are watching with caution. These nations could face difficult choices, as aligning with one side may risk alienating the other. Additionally, the fragmentation of global trade networks, already under strain from pandemic-related disruptions and geopolitical shifts, could accelerate as nations move to diversify supply chains and reduce reliance on single markets. From a consumer perspective, the implications are equally significant. For European automakers, higher tariffs on Chinese EVs could boost demand for locally manufactured alternatives, potentially spurring domestic innovation and competition. Similarly, China's retaliatory measures on brandy may create openings for local or regional producers to fill the gap, altering consumer preferences and market dynamics in unexpected ways. But the bigger question looms: how sustainable is this back-and-forth escalation? Trade wars have a history of leaving all parties worse off, as higher costs, disrupted supply chains, and reduced economic growth take their toll. For now, both Europe and China appear determined to hold their ground, but the longer this standoff continues, the greater the risks for both economies and the global market at large. As the dust settles, the EU-China trade conflict serves as a case study in the complexities of modern geopolitics and global commerce. It's a vivid reminder that in today's interconnected world, no economic decision exists in isolation. For Europe, China, and everyone caught in the middle, the stakes are clear: adapt quickly, or risk being outmaneuvered in an increasingly competitive global landscape. The escalating trade dispute between the European Union and China is heading to the World Trade Organization, WTO, a stage where economic clashes often turn into geopolitical showdowns. With the EU formally requesting consultations over China's brandy tariffs, the spotlight shifts to the global trade body's role in mediating these high-stakes disputes. The EU's move to challenge China's actions at the WTO underscores its commitment to the rules-based international trade system. European leaders argue that the tariffs violate WTO principles, emphasizing the lack of sufficient evidence linking European imports to harm within China's domestic brandy market. The goal is clear: to pressure Beijing into lifting the punitive measures and to reaffirm the importance of fair competition on the global stage. For China, however, this is more than a trade squabble. It's a test of sovereignty and leverage. By imposing tariffs on European luxury goods, Beijing has demonstrated its willingness to push back against Western policies it deems unfair or aggressive. Responding to the EU's challenge at the WTO is as much about protecting its economic interests as it is about asserting its stance as a major global power unwilling to bow to external pressure. As the WTO process unfolds, the implications extend far beyond brandy. The dispute serves as a bellwether for the future of international trade governance, particularly in an era where the WTO itself faces increasing criticism and calls for reform. Both the EU and China are likely to leverage this case to advocate for their broader trade agendas, shaping the narrative around issues like state subsidies, market access, and retaliatory measures. But resolving the dispute will not be easy. WTO cases are notoriously complex and time-consuming, often taking years to reach a conclusion. In the meantime, tensions between the EU and China could escalate further, with both sides potentially introducing additional measures to protect their respective industries. This tit-for-tat dynamic risks creating broader disruptions in global trade networks, impacting not just the parties involved, but also their trading partners and the global economy at large. For the European Union, this case is also a test of its strategic autonomy. Balancing the desire to defend its economic interests with the need to maintain stable relations with China will require careful diplomacy. Similarly, for China, how it navigates this dispute will reflect its evolving approach to global trade and its readiness to engage with a multilateral system that it often critiques as favoring Western powers. The WTO dispute is more than a legal battle. It's a reflection of the growing complexities and frictions in the global economy. As the EU and China square off, the world watches closely, understanding that the outcome will not just decide the fate of brandy tariffs, but could also reshape the rules and norms governing international trade for years to come. The European Union and China have a long history of cooperation, their ties rooted in mutual economic interests and a shared recognition of global interdependence. Over the decades, their partnership has evolved from modest beginnings to become one of the most significant trade relationships in the world. But today, this relationship faces its greatest test, as tensions escalate over trade disputes and geopolitical rivalries. Formal diplomatic relations between the EU and China began in 1975, a pivotal moment that laid the groundwork for a relationship built on economic collaboration. In the years that followed, bilateral trade flourished, with the EU becoming China's largest export market and China emerging as the EU's second-largest trading partner. High-level summits and strategic dialogues became routine, fostering cooperation on issues ranging from climate change to scientific innovation. China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001 marked a turning point, accelerating trade and investment flows. European businesses eagerly tapped into China's vast consumer market, while Chinese companies benefited from access to European technology and capital. The economic synergy between the two powers was undeniable, with trade in goods surpassing €800 billion annually by 2023. However, cracks in the relationship have become increasingly apparent. Concerns over trade imbalances, lack of reciprocal market access, and intellectual property violations have strained ties. The EU, once an enthusiastic partner, now views China as both a strategic competitor and a systemic rival. This shift reflects growing apprehension about China's global ambitions and its implications for European interests. Despite these challenges, neither side can afford to sever ties completely. The EU remains reliant on China for critical goods like electronics and pharmaceuticals, while China depends on European technology and expertise to drive its own development. This mutual dependency underscores the complexity of their relationship, where competition and collaboration coexist uneasily. Recent years have seen efforts by the EU to reduce its reliance on Chinese imports, particularly in strategic sectors like batteries and semiconductors. Initiatives such as the European Battery Alliance and the push for strategic autonomy aim to bolster domestic production and diversify supply chains. At the same time, China has been doubling down on its domestic innovation strategies, seeking to lessen its reliance on Western technologies while expanding its influence in emerging markets. Yet, the current trade disputes signal that the balance of this relationship is shifting. The tariffs, retaliatory measures, and WTO challenges reflect a deeper struggle for dominance in a world where economic power increasingly translates to geopolitical leverage. For the EU and China, navigating this complex and often contentious partnership will require both sides to reassess their priorities and strategies. As the dust settles from these ongoing disputes, one thing is clear: the future of EU-China relations will be shaped not just by economics, but by their ability to manage competition, conflict, and cooperation simultaneously. Whether this results in a new equilibrium or a deeper divide remains to be seen, but the stakes could not be higher for both parties and for the global economy they heavily influence. China's response to the escalating trade tensions with the European Union has been as calculated as it is assertive. Faced with European tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, Beijing has wielded its own economic leverage, targeting one of Europe's most cherished exports, French brandy. The measures, which include provisional anti-dumping duties on European brandy imports, represent a strategic counterstrike aimed at exerting pressure on the EU. France, as the primary exporter of brandy to China, finds itself squarely in the crosshairs. French cognac producers like Hennessy and Rémy Martin, long dominant in the Chinese market, now face increased costs and the potential erosion of their competitive edge. By imposing these duties, China not only strikes a significant economic blow but also sends a clear message: Beijing will not remain passive in the face of what it perceives as unfair trade practices. The stakes for France are substantial. In 2023, French brandy exports to China were valued at approximately $1.7 billion, accounting for the vast majority of the Chinese market. The newly imposed duties threaten to disrupt this lucrative trade flow, prompting concerns about declining sales and shrinking market share. For French producers, the impact is immediate, with rising costs likely to be passed down the supply chain and onto consumers. China's retaliation is more than an economic maneuver. It is a demonstration of its capacity to escalate trade disputes strategically. By targeting a key European export, Beijing highlights the interdependence of global trade and the vulnerabilities that come with it. For the EU, this serves as a stark reminder of the complexities of confronting an economic giant like China, where retaliation can hit hard and fast. The implications extend beyond France and the brandy industry. China's actions signal a willingness to use its economic influence as a bargaining tool in broader trade disputes. This raises questions for other European industries heavily reliant on the Chinese market, from luxury goods to automotive components. The specter of further retaliatory measures looms large, casting a shadow over Europe's economic engagements with China. As tensions escalate, the EU faces the difficult task of balancing its commitment to protecting domestic industries with the need to maintain constructive relations with its largest trading partner. The fallout from the brandy tariffs underscores the high stakes of this balancing act, where every move risks either strengthening alliances or deepening divisions. China, for its part, is likely to continue leveraging its economic dominance to counter external pressures. Its ability to respond swiftly and effectively to European measures demonstrates not only its economic power but also its strategic acumen. As the trade conflict unfolds, Beijing's actions will undoubtedly shape the trajectory of EU-China relations, testing the limits of diplomacy and the resilience of global trade networks. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Italy's evolving role on the global stage. If you've enjoyed this analysis, please consider supporting us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you insights into the forces shaping our world.